con named BJ has sexual intercourse with a dead body and contracts a deadly disease in the process. He goes to a party at night and gets intimate with a girl named Samantha. She starts to bleed a lot starting the next day. Her nails decay, her hair starts to fall out, and she gets rashes all over her body. In the end, she turns into a zombie. In the opening scene, she's already become completely irrational. The police and her mother try to stop her in the middle of the road, but she refuses to cooperate. Instead, she attacks her mother and kills her brutally before being shot dead by the police. While performing an autopsy on her, the doctor comes across a horrifying revelation. Samantha's insides are infested with maggots. It is now day 4 after the disease has started to spread. Sometime prior to Samantha's death, she was in a sexual relationship with her friend Riley. He's scared to have caught the disease, so he goes to his brother-in-law, Dr. James, to get tested. Although he's in a rush to find out, the results will take a few days. While waiting for James to return, Riley feels his back and discovers a lump. He takes his shirt off and is surprised to see a weird bony structure protruding through his back. Using a pair of tweezers, he pulls it out and the wound secretes slimy liquid. As he's leaving the hospital, he gets a call from the police station informing him of Samantha's death and calling him for interrogation, since he was one of the last people who talked to her. Detective Young questions him about Alice Parker. Alice was Samantha's friend who she had killed before she attacked her mother. A flashback shows us that Riley had found Alice's body in the bathtub. While he was trying to call the police, she turned into a zombie and attacked him. Moments later, she died after walking into the knife that he was holding. Back in the present, Riley lies to the detective, claiming that the last time he met Alice was at a party. He's also asked about Samantha, but doesn't mention getting intimate with her. Then the detective brings up BJ, the man who started spreading the disease. Riley had seen BJ and Samantha together at the party, but he claims to have never seen anything suspicious there. As he's returning home, he gets a call from his sister Brenda. She was also Samantha and Alice's friend. She calls him over for a memorial the next day. Riley returns home to his grandmother Margie waiting for him. The two share a drink from a single glass, and Riley accidentally transfers the disease to his grandmother as well. He feels guilty for not telling the detectives the entire truth. He remembers BJ's number plate and calls the police to give them the information. Meanwhile, BJ, who's somehow immune to the disease, is spreading it around town. He pays girls to get intimate with him, and after having sexual intercourse with them, he injects the pathogen virus in their bodies before sending them home. The next day, Riley starts to get the symptoms of the disease like Samantha did when she was first infected. The scratches on his back secrete pus, which he tries to disinfect with alcohol. His friend and Margie's nurse, Harper, come to check on her that morning. Margie has a nasty wound on her lips that Harper assumes is a cold sore, but in reality, it's also a symptom of the disease. Riley finally gets a call from James, who informs him that he's clean of all STDs. Riley is the most relieved he's ever been in the past week, but his happiness doesn't last long. James comments how bad Samantha's disease was. He also adds that she had some kind of necrotic STD which decayed her body while she was still alive. Margie tries to set up Riley and Harper and suggests they go to the memorial together. In the following scene, we see BJ in his hideout talking about Abaddon and justifying his deeds. He's abducted one of the girls he had intercourse with. She's tied to the ceiling and has turned into a zombie. When Riley is at work that day, he gets a text from an unknown number telling him that he shouldn't have done that. He dismisses the message and doesn't think much of it. Then, his associate Debbie comes to visit him. She too has been infected by the virus because of BJ. Riley notices her acting weird and asks her what's wrong. She vaguely claims that something is under her skin. When Riley asks her to elaborate, she reveals nasty rashes on her arms and starts to dig into them. Riley tries to stop her from hurting herself, but gets blood all over himself in the process. At night, he and Harper go to his sister Brenda's home for Alice's memorial. Brenda assumes that the two are a couple, but they quickly deny it. A man starts to read a poem he wrote for Alice, and Riley gets hypersensitive to the noise. He holds his hands over his ears, trying to cut out the voices, but is unsuccessful. Moments later, his nose starts to bleed into a pot of nacho dip placed below. He immediately runs to the washroom, but things get worse when he sneezes blood all over the mirror. Now, his nose starts to bleed even more profusely. Still, he somehow manages to clean it up using toilet paper. Outside, Brenda eats the food, not knowing that it had Riley's blood in it. Riley cleans the mirror, and he and Harper decide to go out for drinks. Meanwhile, Detective Young has found BJ's hideout. She carefully walks in and finds two mannequins set up like they're having a meal together. The detective ignores it and looks around but finds nothing. The scene then abruptly changes back to a bar where Riley and Harper have come for a drink. Riley, who was very sick some time ago, now seems completely normal. As they chat, he gets the same text he'd gotten earlier that day, but from a different number. All of a sudden, Harper kisses him, then excuses herself to go to the washroom. A few seconds later, Riley starts to see blurry and feel dizzy. He again becomes sensitive to noise and has a hard time trying to block the noise of people talking around him. He bumps into a guy only to be helped out by a stranger, who happens to be BJ. It turns out that he's been sending Riley those texts since he informed the police about his car's number plate. BJ then drags Riley out of the bar. When Harper returns and notices that Riley is gone, she assumes that he wasn't interested in her and that the kiss made him uncomfortable. Detective Young is now in the basement of the hideout. She finds a curtain with "I am the end" written on it. Suddenly, a girl who has entirely transformed into a zombie attacks her. Young shoots the girl, but before she dies, she vomits blood in Young's face. In the meantime, BJ talks to a still dizzy Riley. According to him, Riley and he are connected since he gave the disease to Samantha and then she gave it to him. It is now day 6 since the spread started. Riley wakes up in his room and immediately vomits blood. He calls in sick at work and goes to the toilet. His day only gets worse when he then pees blood. The infection has started to show obvious symptoms. Riley's eyes have gotten pink and his face is pale, and there are weird bubbles inside his skin. He freaks out and wears a cap and sunglasses to hide his face. His grandmother is watching the news where the reporter asks people with such symptoms to seek immediate medical help. Riley says goodbye to his grandmother and walks outside, not knowing that she too is infected. After he leaves, Margie opens her eyes, which have now turned milky white. Riley drives to Brenda's house, but she doesn't answer the door. When he barges in, he finds her and James in bed. James sees his eyes and registers that he's also been infected. He urges him to go to the hospital, but Riley insists only BJ has a cure for the condition. He promises to return when he finds the cure and leaves to look for Harper since she might have also been infected by the kiss. Meanwhile, at the police station, Detective Young gets her hands on a recorder with BJ's voice on it. In the audio, he says that mankind is a bacteria that needs to be obliterated. So, in his mind, he's doing God's work. He repeatedly calls himself a disease that'll end mankind. An officer informs Young that BJ had been sending such tapes to the police station from a year ago. He was considered a sociopath and was dismissed, but now they've realized that he's the one spreading the pathogen that is causing so many deaths in the city. Meanwhile, Riley is driving when one of his teeth falls out as a reaction to the disease. Seconds later, he feels something moving under his skin on his face. He stops at a gas station and buys rubbing alcohol, a knife, a lighter, a sewing kit, and a bottle of alcohol. Then he goes to the shop's washroom and takes off his clothes. It's evident that something is moving under his skin throughout his body. He cuts his arm a little and squeezes out a maggot from beneath his skin. He does the same with his shoulders and pulls out a second maggot. He continues pulling them out from different parts of his body, then stitches the wounds back up. He calls his grandmother, but she doesn't pick up. Scared that BJ might have found her, he calls Detective Young, asking her to go to his house. Sometime later, Riley reaches Harper's class and brings her out in the middle of it. A guy from her class interrupts them when suddenly, Harper vomits blood all over him. She too is infected. Following that, the two start looking for BJ in hopes of finding the cure. In the meantime, Detective Young and her team arrive at Riley's house to look for Margie. They find her standing in the dark and looking out the window. As they approach closer, she attacks one of the officers and bites off his nose. She has also turned into a zombie. Young shoots her dead to make sure that she won't cause any more harm. Riley and Harper are now in her room. Young calls Riley and informs him about his grandmother's death. Meanwhile, Harper's eyes turn gray. She feels something moving behind it, and eventually, her entire eyeball pops out. The two then go to a dealer friend who is BJ's associate. Riley threatens him to get him to tell them about BJ's whereabouts, but the man doesn't know anything. Young and her team arrive at the dealer's house and stop Riley from killing him at the last minute. They then bring Riley and Harper to the hospital and separate them. However, as they try to treat Harper, she passes away. Fortunately though, Riley survives, but he's still in a very bad condition. Detective Young informs him of Harper's death and asks him to tell her everything about BJ. At the same time, BJ arrives at the hospital disguised as a doctor. He walks into Riley's room and is about to kill him when he's stopped by Young. However, She can't shoot him because he's wearing an explosive. He threatens her to be able to walk outside and keeps the hospital staff hostage. Just then, the elevator door opens and 2 policemen walk outside. BJ takes the opportunity to fire at everyone and kills the policeman and the hospital staff. Young is also shot in the leg, but before BJ can finish her off for good, Riley attacks him from behind. They get into a fistfight, during which BJ hands on a gun and shoots him to the floor. After that, he points his gun at Young, but Riley saves her again. He bites BJ's neck and kills him. He's now entirely turned into a zombie. Young has no choice but to shoot him dead. In the last scene, James walks into Branda's room and sees that she's also converted into a zombie.